Welcome, everyone, to the Apex Sunday podcast, hosted by myself, Robert Ross, and John Dowsett. And John, this week we're talking about the Dutch TT at Assen. And before we talk about that, how are you?
I'm doing fine. I'm
Yeah,
above the
good.
ground.
Okay. Me too. That's what you think about when we get to our age, isn't it?
It is.
So, before we talk about the race itself and so forth, let's talk about the news. And in my 30-year history of watching mostly F1, frankly, and you've got about 50 years on me or 40, I've never seen the dominoes fall this much within a season, like a silly season this rich or this
hmm
just, constantly changing and so forth. What about you?
Yes, it's not something that I'm thrilled with. I find it a waste of time when people blather on about so and so might go here, might go there, might go here, might go there.
Right.
I'd rather just hear about people signing.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's since the last 3 weeks, we've had a lot of signings. So 3 weeks
hmm
ago, we knew that Martin had signed with Aprilia. So that opened the door for Mark to go to Ducati. Wasn't confirmed. 2 days later, it has since been confirmed. So that puts Enea out of Ducati. So the interesting thing to me is, so I'll list what we've got here. Vinales leaves Aprilia for KTM Tech Trois with supposedly 2025 full factory bikes next season at Tech Trois. That's supposed to be the case this season too with 2024 bikes, but they're slightly behind in some areas, I think. Enea joins
Clearly,
Vinales. Yeah. I mean, these are things that you hear about. You don't get too many details. Sometimes it's sort of like slightly different brake pads or an extra little bit on the fender or a little extra wing, some those kind of things. It's nothing massively different. So
right.
Enea leaves is well basically lost his Ducati ride, so he goes to KTM Tech Trois with Vinales. So that's quite an impressive team. And Acosta moves up
No
from
kidding.
Tech Trois to the KTM factory team with Brad Binder, which pushes Miller out. So we don't know where Miller's going, if anywhere, at this point. And then we have Bezecchi confirmed he's taken Vinales' seat at Aprilia. And also with the fallout with Mark, and I call it a fallout because that's what some of the former Ducati people were saying with signing Mark, is that Pramac, who had I think it was a 20-year relationship with Ducati, are taking a contract with Yamaha for 7 years starting next season as well with full spec
Crazy,
factory bikes. Yeah.
crazy.
This reminds
seven
me of,
years.
yeah, it reminds me a little bit of a few years ago. Tech Trois was actually the Yamaha team. And then they signed with KTM, and everyone thought, well, you're nuts. KTM are nowhere, because at the time, KTM were relatively new and they were pretty bad and towards the back like Honda is now. So we'll see what happens. 7 years is a long time. We've got the new rules coming up in a couple of years. So financially, they're giving him a lot of money and they're paying for the riders, as far as I've heard as well. We don't know who the riders are yet. So that should be interesting. But the owner of Promac basically said when Enea passed Martin and took second from him in Italy, he was off put by the factory Ducati team cheering that, because Martin's a rider, a Ducati rider as well. It just happens to be on a satellite team.
Right.
So I understand like that kind of dynamic with, you don't see that in F1, at least not in current times. In the old days, you used to be able to buy chassis and so forth, right?
Yes.
But I don't quite understand. I sort of understand it, but at the same time, isn't it understandable that sure they're all your riders, but Eneo is in their team, so him taking second place, why wouldn't they cheer? I found that very odd. And Marquez rejecting going to Promac, he didn't like that as well. So, anyways, they're off to Yamaha. And that means that Morbidelli, who used to be with Yamaha, didn't get along with the bike too well, will probably go to VR46 next season. And Digia, they want to keep him at VR46, and Ducati want to keep him, but rumors are that Yamaha want to get him. So there's a whole lot of things going on here. And then Fermin Algader from Moto2 is coming for Ducati next season. He's already signed. So he has to be placed in either VR46 or Gresini. So
Right.
just a very different rider lineup next season. And we've got some top riders in teams that used to be, like, for instance, KTM, used to be sort of for the rookies to come up. But now it's, we just want to win with whatever bikes we have with whatever team we want. So what do you think of all that?
Well, coming back to KTM,
Mm-hmm.
uh, you know, KTM's a huge company, and
Yes.
and and maybe there's something that we didn't know. You'll look at it and say, "Why KTM?" But look what KTM's been able to do. KTM's a force.
Yes.
Um, and the question now becomes is, what do they know that we don't know? And I think
Mm-hmm.
that's the big thing. And if somebody's signing and that sort of thing's happening, it's kind of a message that there's something big.
Yeah.
Also, with Mark signing with Ducati, um, what does that tell you? I mean, there's got to be something behind that as well.
I think that they're impressed with his data. He's the top 2023 rider, and they must see what he's doing with the bike and think, we need this guy on our bike. That's my conclusion, because that's always been the case with Mark. So I know he's had a lot of injuries and so forth, and he hasn't had the success he used to have, especially with Honda tanking. But he's doing pretty well. I mean, he's third in the championship. He's never ridden this bike before this season. He's always been on a Honda. So I think they've seen his data and they said, we need this guy in our team. And perhaps, I don't know, maybe there's some personality issues with Martine, but that's just pure speculation. I don't know.
Right.
So we'll see. Additional news is Alex Marquez has re-signed with Gresini for a couple years, and Aleix has signed with Honda to be their test rider. And
That's
finally,
interesting.
yeah, he's got a couple decades of experience, and a lot of people
Yeah.
credit him with building the Aprilia into what they are now. Because when he went there, like I said before, Aprilia was the team to go kill your career at, and
Yeah.
now they're much better. But it's not just the rider. They signed Rivola from Formula One. I don't know what team he used to be involved with, but the Ducati guys have signed some F1 engineers as well over the last few seasons. Um, and the engine has been, re-engineered, and it used to be 75 degrees. I think it's 95 degrees. I can't remember exactly. So they redid the engine. So Leish obviously wasn't doing that, but his input will be very valuable, I think, because Honda are just, they don't seem to be going anywhere. At least Yamaha, you see them occasionally in the top 10, but Honda are just absolutely nowhere. It's kind of embarrassing for them.
A- And you bring up an interesting point because historically, if you look at the great teams that have had dynasties,
Mhm.
it's been with riders or drivers that have been workaholics.
Yes.
In Formula One, you look at Michael Schumacher, who basically gave up his life just to do
Yep.
that. Ayrton Senna, who just gave up his life to develop cars.
Mhm.
Um, yeah,
Max.
it's a big thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's what I have to say, though, that what is good about all this is that at least these teams are willing to pit top drivers against each other, unlike, say, Red Bull with Perez, which is still bothering me. But I like
Likewise.
that, like they're putting, there's not necessarily a number one, two. I mean, Pecco's obviously the focus of Ducati now because he's getting the results, but Ine is a great rider. Uh,
Hmm.
Vinales is a good rider. They're both at KTM. Bezecchi, he's not having a good year this year, but he did last year. He's finished third in the championship. So, you know, really good riders competing against each other. It's nice to see, and I wish we could see that in F1 a little bit more.
Hmm.
And then the final odd rumor, I guess, I don't know if it's news, is Lewis Hamilton rumored to be interested in buying the Gresini team. And I know he owns some parts of some NFL teams, and I know he's got a lot of money. Some people who despise Lewis are really upset about this. I don't see how it's going to affect much of anything. I don't see, like, if like I'm a Mark and Mir fan, so to say. I don't really,
Mhm.
but if they invested in some movie or something, like, I probably wouldn't care less. it's it's an odd take that this is a negative thing.
I think
I
it's a really positive thing for the team.
Oh yeah,
You know, you've
oh yeah,
you've got you.
absolutely.
I mean, you've got a really uh, the most successful racer in Formula One. He didn't, and I know that this is about MotoGP, but Lewis Hamilton is also possibly the cleanest world champion who's ever driven. You'll hear all the noise thanks to all of the Max Verstappen fans that he's a weapon,
Yeah.
but he's the farthest thing from it. He's one of the cleanest drivers I've ever seen. And
Mhm.
what does that tell you? So if he's able to win championships and drive cleanly, he's looking at other things. He's looking how to develop a
Yes.
car around him, and he's looking how to put a team together that can develop a car.
Yeah, and he'll
Fantastic stuff.
certainly promote it, and he'll certainly promote
Oh yeah.
the team and the sport a little bit more along with
Mhm.
Liberty Media, right? So
Yes.
um, he's probably going to try a couple of bikes out as well. He did try the Yamaha M1 a few seasons ago, but not since then. So yeah, very interesting 3 weeks with a lot of riders moving, shifting teams and so forth, shifting entire bikes, new bikes for Promac. Very, very interesting 3 weeks off. So let's go into what was a little less interesting, frankly, and that was the Assen TT at in Holland. And before we go into that, do you know much about the Assen track? I mean, I've heard of it, and they call it the cathedral, the motorcycle cathedral, is it used to be a bit bigger in the past, and it is a very impressive and fast track. But
It's a beautiful
I've never driven it in a simulation or anything, so I don't know anything about it.
right. And I'm
Yeah.
and I'm sort of along the same lines. I've never driven it in a sim,
Mhm.
and what a beautiful track. My God, the one thing that really shone for me was it really highlighted the difference between the different bikes, and
Oh
you could
yeah.
see how some of the manufacturers were very squirrely in comparison to others. and
Yes.
and I found that fascinating because I'd not really seen it on that kind of display before.
Right. Right.
Coming being able to flip the bike back and forth, or not being able to flip the bike back and forth, and it was huge.
Yeah. Well, we'll talk a little bit about that's basically. Let's move on to qualifying. And in qualifying, not too much happened. Qualifying is qualifying. So what's interesting to me, it was nice to see the bikes at the limit. I agree with you. I hadn't seen them sliding around quite that much, and the way Marquez fell in Q2 when he passed Aleix, the way he changed direction so fast and then just lost it, that was the speed was
Yeah.
very, very impressive, wasn't it?
Yes. Yes.
And then,
um I don't know. I think that I was seeing a lot of squirreliness in the bikes at the limit, but
mhm,
not all of them.
mhm. Yeah, it's interesting that it's the limit that seeing things at the limit is always entertaining, isn't it? Even if it's not the greatest race, at least you can see them at the limit. And in
Yes.
qualifying, we also had Inea qualifying only 11th, so he's still having a little bit of qualifying trouble. But I thought when he did that, I thought, well, is there another comeback possible? And then, of course, Pecco was brilliant in qualifying and basically the entire the weekend. So, anything
Yes.
else about qualifying?
He schooled everybody.
Yeah,
He
yeah,
schooled everybody. New track record by
yep, yep.
almost a second faster than the previous record, which is just insanely fast.
Yeah, they're saying that the overall race was 30 seconds faster than the last season, mostly because of the tires. That is huge,
Mm.
isn't it? That's a
Yeah.
massive gain. I mean, I
Yeah.
think they said that the top 12 in the race were faster than Pecco was last season when he won the race in a
Crazy.
faster time. So yeah,
Crazy.
like Pecco won here the last two years. So let's move on to the sprint. And in the sprint, uh, all I have to say, it was good to see Fabio in the top 10 with Yamaha, slowly making progress. They're certainly pushing, it seems, a lot more than Honda. Mark crashed out. He said that he knew the bump was there and he just miscalculated it the second time he went over it. It seemed to destabilize the bike and he crashed out. But I like that there's no excuses. It's just I made a mistake, so I crashed out.
Hmm.
That's it. That's all there was for me to the sprint. I mean, Pecco dominated it, so he gets my driver or sorry, rider of the sprint, and I'm going to rate it a 6. What about you?
Relatively uneventful. Not a lot of passing. Um, I'm gonna rate it a 4.
Okay. And well, who's your rider of the sprint?
Same as you. It's got to be.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And I think before we get into the race, I think this goes back to what I was saying earlier about the existence of ride height devices, starting devices, massive aero. I mean, Alicia Spargo was saying that the aero is so strong these days that our arms can't handle it often. Um, was it 2018 or 2017? I think it was 2018. This race had 130 plus passes. It was one of the best races I've ever seen in my life. So why such a difference in 4 or 5 years? And so I'm hopeful that when they have the new rules in 2027, that we go back to that similar to that level because that race was just 130x passes. That's amazing, isn't it? So I'd like to see that again. So I was kind of disappointed ever since then that that kind of race was never repeated at Assen. It may be asking
What's
for too
the?
much.
I mean, how much difference is there in the equipment? I mean, I'd say that there's a pretty large gap between the works and the other bikes. And because if you watch that race, Marquez was giving it his all. He really was,
Yes. Yeah.
and just couldn't make any ground. And
No.
used some great racecraft to finish where he did,
Mhm.
and was so consistent. He was very very good in the race, um, but just didn't have the bike to do it. And
No.
you watched Pecco just drive off into the sunset. I mean, what was the gap? It was so big. You could look at it and you sort of knew
Yeah.
he'd have to really mess up for anything to change.
Yeah. Martine, it was great to see Martine push quite a lot to try to keep up with him. But again, he couldn't as well, right? So,
Hmm.
uh, and then we had Enea had a great comeback from 11 to third.
That was good.
Uh, but I guess there's two things to talk about here that I find fascinating. First, there's Pecco's domination. Some riders and drivers at certain courses just seem to click, and I think this is the case with Pecco. And he's reduced his deficit to Martin to 10 points, which has got to be very concerning to Martin, given his
Hmm.
form. And then the whole thing about Mark waving Digio by. What was your thought when you saw that? Like, were you thinking, what the hell's going on here?
I just thought he didn't have what it took to stay in front of him, so he waved him
Mm.
through. And
So
better than that, better that than getting tight around a
bumped into.
corner and
Right,
getting
right.
right.
But it ended up being what Simon Crafar said is the tire pressure. So to review, each race, Michelin says this is the tire pressure that your tires have to be. And the riders have to be in that pressure for 60% of the race. Okay. So whatever, how, each race has a different number of laps. So that 60%, it's not laps, it's 60% determined per each race.
Right.
Problem is that, so a lot of the riders start under pressure because they know that the heat from following someone will bring the
Of
pressure
course.
up. Yeah.
And brakes.
So, yeah, exactly. So if you're a rider who thinks you're going to be at the front, you might start with a higher pressure so that it doesn't drop so much. So Mark basically dropped back because he saw on his dashboard he was under pressure, so he needed the lap. So that instantly means that you're done competing for the top two spots, if that's the case. If you've got tire pressure problems. So when
Yes.
he got passed by Enea, that pushed him out of the circuit. Now, Mark said he didn't really complain about it, but he just said, I got pushed off the circuit. So coming back on for 2 laps, his pressure dropped. And so he was out by 0.01 for 1 lap, which resulted in a penalty. And so he was demoted, I think, to 10th or something. So um, it's
Hmm.
very interesting to me that he argued that, well, I got pushed off, so that's why that happened. Otherwise, I managed it very well, as you can see by letting a rider pass him. And his crew chief earlier in the year, or maybe even last season, when they were making these tire pressure rules, outlined this scenario exactly. He said, we're going to see people being pushed off, trying to come back, get a great result, and then they're pushed back because they were under the tire pressure rule. So it's done for safety, but the riders, a lot of them don't like it too much, and I frankly don't have the knowledge and technical expertise to really criticize it, but it's a little bit messy to me. What do you think?
I think it's ridiculous.
Well,
Absolutely
Fabio,
ridiculous.
sorry, just to say, Fabio lost out in Jerez to his third place for the same
It's
reason.
ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous. I mean, you've got to have a margin. It's got to be a bigger margin than that. You can't
Mm.
have something that tight because that's just absolutely ridiculous. And it's not just because I like Mark Marquez or another rider. It's just a silly, silly rule.
Yeah,
You know, I get it with um, Formula One where you get blowouts. You
right.
know, too little pressure and tire comes off the rim. Too much pressure, it blows up.
Mm.
I get that, but when was the last time you saw a tire go that way in MotoGP? I've never seen one.
I may have, I don't remember. And if I did, it was probably like a puncture, like picking up debris, right? So,
So, so the only other aspect would be what happens if you toast your tires and you're going to fall off the back.
yeah,
It, it, it lose the rule. I mean,
it's
my
really
God.
weird. Yeah, I mean, I think they might refine it a little bit, but I think this is also a symptom of what we see across. I don't know all the motorsports, but when I look at the news, all I talk, not all, but a lot of the talk is penalty this, penalty that. Uh, you do have to enforce proper racing etiquette, but it seems that in trying to enforce the rules, they've made the rules almost unenforceable because they're so weird and
Let's look at it this way. Let's look at it this way. If we go back to the deadliest era of motorsport,
yes,
it was the drivers were just pawns. They didn't matter.
yeah,
They didn't matter. I mean, yes, you had to have skill,
mhm,
granted, but um, fuel lines going through the cockpit, just absolutely ridiculous stuff. Feet in front of the front wheels, that on and on and on and on.
flammable material all over the place, right?
But now
Stuff
it's
like that.
gone too far the other way. Now it's gone too far the other way. There was a wonderful debate that went on for decades between Sir Jackie Stewart and Sir
Hmm.
Sterling Moss. And Sir Sterling Moss said that, it was such a sterile, safe event. You may as well be watching ping pong
Right.
with what they've done with Formula One. And he's sort of got a point. So you can take the safety thing too far. If you want to take tires, for God's sakes, and make that a safety issue, well, come on. I mean, now we're just getting silly. And I understand airbags. I understand suits that are going to support your back. I
Yep.
understand all of those things. Helmets, all of those things are incredibly important. But don't let it affect the results of a season, and that's what it's going to do.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Well,
And it's not just that.
we'll see if they refine it. But uh, who was it that lost? Had to go back. It was Vinales, I think. Had to go back a slot because his tire touched the green on the last
Yes,
exit
yes,
on the
yes.
last lap. And
Hmm.
where's the advantage there? There is no advantage.
Right.
As a matter of fact,
Well,
by touching it, his bike wiggled and he lost a little time. The same thing happened
that's
to
kind of
Brad
gray
Binder
area.
last season. Mm-hmm.
That's gray area. That's gray area for me.
Is it?
Either you have track limits or you don't, and and
Well, yeah, I agree
you
with
have to
that.
have track limits.
It's that sort of thing where I think the problem, one of the problems we're having, and it's a double sided sword because the problem is that they've by making things absolute, they take out the proper judgment of the stewards, saying, oh, okay, well, like this guy got pushed off track. Is that a track limits warning, or is that just because he got pushed
Right.
off track? That kind of thing. But at the same time, when you put judgment in, people disagree with the judgment, and sometimes, oh, there's biased, he's British or he's Spanish.
I'm perfectly fine with people being pissed off at bias. I'm perfectly fine with that.
Okay,
And even more now that we've got Liberty Media, and a lot of the fans are just, I
yeah,
hate the term, but they're just fanboys.
yeah,
It's crazy. It's crazy. And if you're a fan of this sport, you can look at it and you can say, well, he exceeded track limits, he should get a penalty. Oh, he exceeded track limits and he didn't gain any time. He lost time. He shouldn't get a penalty.
mm-hmm.
In the old system, that works brilliantly. And you know what? Maybe if Liberty Media is smart, they'll bring that back just to get people pissed off, so they'll want to watch the next race to see, who are they
Right,
going to screw next.
right, right. Okay. So for rider of the race, I mean, I know that I think both of us gave Mark rider of the race and sprint a few races ago because he came back from 13th and 11th,
Hmm.
and Enea did that this time. But I'm gonna give it to Pecco because no one was better than him. No one could touch him. He was, to me, the absolute best rider of the entire event. What about you?
It's an A.
It is.
Funny that. Yeah. I mean, I looked at it and I thought, you know what? Pecco's a spectacular pilot. He's
Mhm.
phenomenal, phenomenal. So's Martine. So
Yeah.
they were circling the track on their own,
Yep.
basically. Um, and Martine had an open track to do whatever he wanted, and he couldn't catch him.
Right.
And so that tells me it's machinery. I still, in the sprint race and in qualifying, what he did impressed me. What Pecco did, but Enea impressed me in the race, coming from 11th and
Right.
battling his way through.
Well, that also reminds me that it seems like so we've got Pecco, Enea, Martine, and Morbidelli on the 2024 Ducatis, and Mark and the VR46 guys and his brother on the 2023. Mark's in third in the championship. Digia's in fifth or sixth. So those are the top two 2023 riders. But we're not seeing the racing as close as it was just a few races ago. And I
Yeah,
think that the further development of the 2024 bike, whereas the 2023s are stuck in their development,
right.
I think that's why we're seeing a little bit more spread now. And perhaps as Pecco gets more comfortable with this new bike for this year, he's just going to continue to eat into Martine's lead. But I think it's going to be
Fantastic.
between those two for the rest of the season. Mark has a slight outside chance, but I think it's going to be very, very difficult. I will say that in 2022, Pecco came back from a 91-point deficit to Fabio Quartararo to win the championship. So the man has steel in his veins. He doesn't get freaked out by deficits or all these kind of things. Once he's on circuit, he does his best, and it's usually quite excellent. So, anyways, I
I don't
agree
think
with you, Nate.
anybody at that level. I don't
Mm-hmm.
think anybody at that level
Gets
gets
rattled like that.
phased. And
Yeah.
no, I- No, I really don't. I think,
Mm.
if you can make it to that level, you're going to get the best out of the bike that you can. And I
Yeah.
agree with what you say about Mark Marquez. Is I don't think that he has the machinery to do it. But
No.
you know what? It's not like he was dogging it. It's
No.
not like he was. I mean, he's still giving it the beans the whole way.
Yep.
So
Yeah.
other than waving somebody through, but that was probably just smart racecraft.
Well, that's racecraft. It's unusual racecraft because of this rule, but that's what it is, right? So,
Hmm.
what do you rate this race at then?
I would race it at a 2. I would rate it at a 2
Mhm.
if it wasn't for Anea, and that sort of boosts it to about a 5.
Okay. I enjoyed it a little bit more. I'm gonna give it a 6. Again, we're in that sort of, for me personally, I'm in that weird standard of F1 gaps and the standard of MotoGP gaps. And now the MotoGP gaps are expanding again, but they're not as big as the
Right.
F1 gap, all this stuff. But
Yes.
I'm going to hold them to a high standard. This is why I got into the sport, is because the racing was so entertaining. So when it's not as entertaining, it's not going to get my full mark. So I'm going to give it a
You,
6, but I still found it somewhat entertaining. Mm-hmm.
you're gonna have to wind that back because the last number of races in Formula One have been tight.
I've heard that. Yeah, I've
So you're gonna have to stop using that excuse and say I gave up on Formula One because of this.
right.
Yeah, but
Well, it was true.
it's
It
not like that anymore.
was true at the time, though. So
Right.
So next
Yeah.
up, we have the Sachsen Ring in Germany. Mark has won there from
Nice.
2010 to 2019. So 125 Moto 2, and then through MotoGP, got injured, didn't race in 2020, came back in 2021, won there, didn't race in 2022, tried to race in 2023, crashed five times, gave the finger to his Honda, and said he didn't participate in the race. Said, I can't sacrifice my body. I'm done. And that's basically when he decided to either quit end his career or move on to a different team. So the big interest there is that he's been so dominant there. Can he win there again with a bike that's a year old? Last year it was Martin who won. So we may have a better race. Maybe it'll be closer because Mark is so good at this circuit. So we'll see.
Yeah.
Anyways, let's
No.
talk about it then. And after that, this is
Yes.
summer break. So talk to you next week, John, and see you later. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Rob. Bye.
Bye.